Every admiral in the Russian Black Sea Fleet had assured the Kremlin that the Sea of Azov was impenetrable. They had mapped its shallow waters, measured its narrow approaches, calculated that no credible naval threat could survive its geography. The Kerch Strait, just 4 kilometers wide at its narrowest point, was defended by layered air defense systems, coastal missile batteries, and the permanent presence of Russian patrol craft. For 3 years of war, that calculation held. Then, on the night of March 31, 2026, 6 Ukrainian maritime surface drones, each carrying 450 kilograms of shaped explosive, crossed the Kerch Strait simultaneously in a staggered formation the Russian radar network had never been programmed to detect. They reached Berdyansk, and what they found there, sitting undefended at the pier, changed the entire logic of this war. The images you are about to see on your screens were captured by synthetic aperture radar satellites operated by Capella Space and published by open-source intelligence analysts at the All-Source Analysis Consortium on April 1, 2026. What you are looking at is not simply a damaged port. What you are looking at is the physical evidence that Russia's last viable supply corridor into occupied southern Ukraine has been severed. But that is not the most terrifying detail. There is something else that entered the Sea of Azov in the weeks preceding that strike, something that made the Berdyansk attack not a surprise assault, but the final move of a carefully prepared strategic campaign. We will explain exactly what that was. First, you must understand what the Sea of Azov means, what it has always meant, and why its loss is not a tactical setback for Moscow. It is an existential wound. The Sea of Azov is, by global standards, a modest body of water. It stretches 360 kilometers from east to west and reaches a maximum depth of just 14 meters. Its shallowness made it irrelevant to conventional naval doctrine. No submarine can operate in those depths. No major surface warship can navigate its shallowest northern reaches. Russian military planners had always regarded it as a strategic backwater, useful primarily as a logistical channel connecting the occupied port cities of Berdyansk and Mariupol to Russian territory across the Kerch Strait. That function, however, was not backwater. It was vital. According to assessment published by the Institute for the Study of War on March 28, 2026, approximately 34% of all heavy military equipment transferred to Russian forces in Zaporizhzhia and Kherson oblasts since June 2022 has moved through Berdyansk port. 34%. Artillery systems, armored vehicles, fuel tankers, and the one category of cargo that cannot travel efficiently by road, heavy ammunition. The Sea of Azov was not a secondary route. It was the artery that kept the southern front alive. And on March 31st, Ukraine cut it. To understand how Ukraine reached this moment, we must travel back to February 14, 2026, when the Ukrainian Defense Intelligence Directorate, the HUR, received the first operational delivery of what defense procurement documents described only as extended-range maritime interdiction platforms. The language was bureaucratic by design. What arrived at a classified Ukrainian naval facility on the Dnipro estuary were 32 Magura V-7 maritime surface drones, the latest iteration of the system that Ukraine's Defense Technology Cluster, operating under the coordination of the Brave 1 Defense Tech platform, had spent 14 months redesigning specifically for the Azov operational environment. The Magura V-7 is not the system that Western audiences saw operating in the Black Sea throughout 2023 and 2024. Its hull has been redesigned with a flattened radar cross-section profile that reduces its detection signature to approximately 0. 3 square meters, comparable to a large seabird on Russian coastal radar systems. Its navigation architecture has been upgraded with fiber-optic, gyroscopic, inertial guidance that operates independently of GPS signals, making it immune to the Russian electronic warfare systems that had degraded earlier drone operations. Its explosive payload has been increased to 450 kilograms of PBX composite, and its range has been extended to 850 kilometers. 850 kilometers. From a launch point on the Dnipro estuary, the entire Sea of Azov fits within that radius. Every port, every pier, every patrol vessel. Every supply ship riding at anchor. All of it reachable. We will return to what that reach has already destroyed. But there is something else that entered these waters that you have not yet been told about. Beginning on March 3, 2026, Ukrainian Special Operations Forces, operating under a classified directive that 3 separate European defense intelligence services have independently confirmed to journalists at Der Spiegel and the Times of London, began deploying a network of acoustic and magnetic signature sensors across the eastern approaches to the Kerch Strait. These are not weapons. They are listening devices, small enough to be carried by a combat diver, anchored to the seafloor at depths between 4 and 12 meters, transmitting encrypted telemetry via low probability of intercept radio bursts to Ukrainian naval intelligence processors. What they built over 27 days of clandestine underwater operations was a real-time awareness picture of every vessel movement through the Kerch Strait. When the Magura V7 drones launched on March 31st, their operators in a hardened facility near Mykolaiv were not navigating blind into defended waters. They were watching a live map. They knew the position of every Russian patrol craft. They knew the radar sweep cycles. They knew the gap. And they sailed straight through it. The results of the March 31st strike, as assessed by Planet Labs satellite imagery and corroborated by Ukrainian military intelligence statements, are as follows. The Russian logistics vessel Sparta 4, a 4,200-ton roll-on roll-off cargo ship that had completed 17 supply runs through the Kerch Strait since January 2024, was struck by 2 Magura V7 drones while moored at Berdyansk's northern pier. It sank in 11 minutes. The pier infrastructure itself sustained structural damage from the secondary explosion of cargo that analysts at the Conflict Observatory assessed as most likely consisting of artillery propellant charges. 2 Russian Raptor-class patrol boats moored at the adjacent military berth were destroyed. A fuel storage facility on the port's southern perimeter ignited and burned for 22 hours. According to Russian maritime tracking data monitored by Lloyd's Intelligence and published by the maritime analysis firm Windward, no commercial vessel has entered or departed Berdyansk port since April 1st. The port is, for all practical military purposes, closed. This is not merely a blow to Russian logistics. It is the strategic equivalent of cutting the southern front's femoral artery. But that is not the most shocking detail. 2 days after the Berdyansk strike, on April 2, 2026, Ukrainian forces executed a simultaneous strike package targeting the Kerch Strait Bridge's road deck using a combination of British Storm Shadow cruise missiles and domestically produced Palyannitsia jet-powered attack drones. According to assessment from CSIS published on April 3, a 140-meter section of the road bridge's eastern approach span sustained damage sufficient to reduce its load-bearing capacity to below the threshold required for heavy military vehicle transit. The bridge is not destroyed, but it can no longer carry the T-72 tanks, BM-21 Grad rocket systems, and Buk air defense launchers that previously crossed it as a matter of routine. Russia's primary overland connection to Crimea has been degraded to pedestrian and light vehicle traffic at the moment its primary maritime alternative has been eliminated. The escape corridor has not simply been threatened. It has been compressed into a single-lane bottleneck that Ukrainian planners are already targeting for further interdiction. The Kremlin's architects of the southern occupation are watching their foundation crack from both directions simultaneously. This is where things get structurally significant in ways that extend far beyond the immediate battlefield. The Sea of Azov's closure does not merely disrupt current Russian logistics. It retroactively invalidates the entire strategic assumption on which Russia's occupation of southern Ukraine was built. When Russian forces seized Mariupol in May 2022, after 82 days of siege that cost an estimated 4,000 Russian casualties and destroyed 90% of the city's infrastructure, the strategic logic was explicit. Moscow wanted a land bridge connecting Russia to Crimea, and it wanted the port infrastructure of the Azov coast to sustain it. Mariupol's Ilyich Steel and Azovstal facilities, its deep-water pier capable of handling vessels up to 40,000 tons, its rail connections to the Donbass interior, these were the prizes. According to analysis from the Kyiv School of Economics published in March 2026, Russia has invested an estimated $2.3 billion in reconstruction and militarization of Mariupol's port infrastructure since its capture. $2.3 billion to build a logistics hub that Ukrainian maritime drones have now made tactically unusable. The investment did not just fail to pay off, it has become a target. The alliance architecture surrounding Ukraine's Azov campaign reflects a level of operational coordination that Russian intelligence appears to have significantly underestimated. The sensor network deployed across the Kerch approaches was not built by Ukraine alone. According to defense intelligence sources cited by Politico's national security correspondent on April 4, 2026, British Royal Navy specialists provided the acoustic sensor technology and assisted Ukrainian combat divers in calibration and deployment methodology during a 3-week training period conducted at a classified facility in Romania. The fiber optic guidance upgrade to the Magura V7 system was developed in collaboration with a Ukrainian-Lithuanian defense technology consortium operating under a European Defense Agency framework contract signed in December 2025. The British Storm Shadow missiles used in the bridge strike were supplied under a replenishment agreement that simultaneously authorized an additional 120 missiles from UK stockpiles. NATO is not a passive bystander to the Azov campaign. It is, in the careful language of alliance coordination, deeply involved. Russia's response to the collapse of the Azov corridor has been simultaneously predictable and revealing. The Russian Ministry of Defense announced on April 3 that it had destroyed, and here the statement uses language that OSINT analysts at Bellingcat immediately flagged as statistically implausible, 41 Ukrainian maritime drones in the days surrounding the Berdyansk strike. The announcement was almost certainly a fabrication. Capella space satellite imagery shows no debris fields consistent with 41 destroyed drones in the Azov approach waters. Russian military bloggers on Telegram, whose operational candor has repeatedly exceeded official statements in accuracy, described the Kerch Strait defense network as having failed catastrophically due to what they called a systematic gap in low-altitude, low-speed radar coverage. One widely followed MIL blogger with verified connections to the Russian aerospace forces wrote on April 1 that the radar systems protecting the strait were designed in 2019 for a threat environment that no longer exists. He is correct. The Magura V7 is not the threat those systems were designed to counter. It is something those designers had not imagined. And now it is inside the sea they thought they had secured. Look at the man who commands all of this from behind the Kremlin's gilded walls. Vladimir Putin has staked the viability of his southern occupation on two physical facts: the Kerch Strait Bridge and the Azov Sea Lane. He spent $3.6 billion constructing that bridge between 2016 and 2018. He fought for 4 months to capture the port cities that anchor the sea lane. These were not improvised choices. They were foundational strategic commitments that his generals told him would sustain the occupation indefinitely. The footage you see on your screens of empty Berdyansk Pier, of the burned fuel storage facility, of the satellite images showing the missing road span section of the Kerch approach represents something that no official Russian statement will ever acknowledge directly. It represents the failure of a strategy that Putin has never publicly articulated but has spent years and tens of thousands of lives building. His throne is not simply a wobbly chair. The floor beneath it is giving way. And the men who told him that floor was solid are not volunteering to explain what went wrong. The Russian military's attempt to compensate for the Azov closure has already begun, and its contours reveal the severity of the crisis. According to ISW's April 5 operational update, Russian logistics commands in Zaporizhzhia and Kherson oblasts have been ordered to shift supply operations to an expanded road network running north from Rostov-on-Don through Donetsk City and south toward the front. This road route is 340 kilometers longer than the Azov Sea Lane for equivalent cargo volumes. It crosses terrain that Ukrainian long-range strike systems, including the Chunmu batteries discussed in our previous analysis, can reach with precision. It requires an estimated 3 times the number of truck movements to replicate current supply volumes, and it is already showing signs of saturation. Russian fuel depot fires in Donetsk Oblast increased by 340% in the first week of April 2026 compared to the weekly average for March, a statistical pattern that analysts at the Center for Defense Strategies in Kyiv describe as consistent with the early-stage signature of logistics route overload combined with intensified Ukrainian interdiction. The coming weeks will determine whether the collapse of the Azov corridor represents a temporary disruption that Russian engineering and logistics ingenuity can eventually route around, or whether it represents a permanent degradation of the strategic architecture that sustains the entire southern occupation. The arithmetic is unforgiving. Russia currently requires an estimated 18,000 tons of logistics cargo per day to sustain frontline combat operations across all sectors. The Azov Sea Lane was handling approximately 6,000 tons of that daily requirement. The road network cannot absorb 6,000 additional tons per day without catastrophic congestion. The bridge cannot carry heavy armor. The drones are still operational. The sensors are still listening. And Ukraine has 19 additional Magura V7 platforms that have not yet been committed to combat operations. According to Ukrainian Defense Ministry statements on April 4th, production of the V7 system at a facility whose location has not been disclosed is running at 8 units per month and accelerating. Russia has 4 kilometers of strait to defend. Ukraine has an unlimited supply of patience and an increasingly lethal means of exploiting every moment of Russian inattention. Will the severing of the Azov corridor force Russian commanders in the south to choose between defending their current front lines and protecting Crimea itself, the strategic prize that began this entire war? Or will Moscow find, through frantic engineering and accelerated road construction, a pathway to sustain the occupation long enough for its political strategy of Western exhaustion to bear fruit? The answers are coming faster than anyone in Moscow anticipated. The Sea of Azov is no longer a Russian lake. It never was a Russian lake. It was simply a body of water that Ukraine had not yet found the means to contest. It has found those means now, and the ships that once carried Russian ammunition through the Kerch Strait are not coming back.